Welcome back to Medicine with Meaning with Dr. Julie Ta. Today we're talking about something many people feel but rarely understand: hormones. These chemical messengers influence everything from energy and mood to metabolism, sleep, appetite, and stress. But hormone symptoms can be confusing, and many people feel dismissed or overwhelmed when seeking answers. Dr. Julie, let's help people make sense of their bodies today. Hormones get blamed for everything: fatigue, irritability, cravings, weight change. From your perspective, what are hormones actually doing in the body, and why do they get misinterpreted so often?
Hormones do get blamed for everything, and they can certainly cause fatigue, irritability, cravings, and weight changes. And yes, hormones influence all of those things. But clinically, hormones are rarely the root cause. They're actually just responders. They're messengers. Hormones form our body's communication network. They adjust day to day based on stress, sleep, inflammation, and blood sugar. So when someone says, "My hormones are out of control," what I often see is that the hormones are doing exactly what the body is asking them to do, but in a challenging environment. So cortisol rises when the nervous system is overloaded. Insulin climbs when blood sugar spikes. Thyroid hormone downshifts to conserve energy. And then estrogen and progesterone fluctuates with stress, nourishment, and of course during life's transitions. So it's not that these hormones are misbehaving. They're our physiology adapting to our environment. So instead of asking, "What's wrong with my hormones?" a better question is, "What are my hormones trying to tell me about how my body is doing?" When we address the upstream drivers like stress, sleep, inflammation, nutrients, blood sugar, hormones often rebalance naturally. So they're not the villain, they're the feedback.
Wow, that's so interesting. Thank you for bringing that perspective. So when hormones are acting up, there's usually an underlying problem causing that imbalance in the hormone signaling or communication. Okay. So many people think that hormone issues are only about estrogen or thyroid. I often hear, I have thyroid imbalance. Or can you walk us through the key hormones: insulin, cortisol, thyroid, sex hormones, and how they work together as a network?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with insulin because it sets the foundation. Insulin manages blood sugar and energy delivery. When blood sugar is stable, the rest of the hormone system tends to function more smoothly. But when blood sugar spikes and crashes because of stress, skipped meals, or too many refined carbs, insulin stays elevated. And that affects how all the other hormones behave. Cortisol, our stress hormone, is closely tied to insulin. So when stress is high, cortisol rises to keep blood sugar available. And over time, that drives insulin to be higher, which increases inflammation and signals the body to shift into survival mode. Then what happens is that the body often turns down thyroid activity. And thyroid hormone regulates our metabolic pace. They're also very sensitive to stress and inflammation. So elevated cortisol and unstable blood sugar can reduce thyroid signaling, which is why people feel cold, fatigue, foggy, or struggle with their weight, even when thyroid labs look normal. So let me explain it in another way. It's the thyroid signaling that's what matters. And that is how our cells hear and respond to thyroid hormones. And it's not just how much thyroid hormone is in your blood. Then moving on to the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. These hormones actually are not at the top of the hierarchy. I mean, this kind of makes sense. When our body is under stress, it prioritizes survival over reproduction. And chronic stress and insulin resistance can lower progesterone. It can change estrogen metabolism and reduce testosterone availability. And this can lead to symptoms like poor sleep, mood changes, cycle irregularity, or low energy. So what looks like an estrogen or thyroid problem, it's often the downstream effect of stress and metabolic imbalance. That's why I never look at one hormone in isolation. And I'm always asking, what's happening with stress, with blood sugar, with sleep? When those foundations are supported, the hormone network often stabilizes on its own and symptoms begin to make sense instead of feeling random. And it's important to understand that our hormones function in a network. Another analogy is it's like a symphony, right? It's not just one instrument, but it's the symphony playing together.
So you would say that infertility, for example, it's not a root cause. It's a symptom, but not a symptom of hormone imbalance, but it could just be a symptom of stress even.
Well, let's not talk about infertility right now because that's complex and there are many root causes. But let's talk about menstrual irregularity. Again, there are many root causes, but let's just focus on how stress and nutrition can impact our menstrual cycle. So certainly if a woman is not nourishing well, getting enough nutrients, especially fat, because fat and cholesterol are the building blocks of sex hormones. And so if you're not nourishing well enough, or a classic example would be high performance athletes. These women, they train hard, they put a lot of stress on their body, they have very little body fat, and they often lose their periods. So this is an example of our hormones are responding to our lifestyle. As one example of how our hormones are simply responding to what we're doing to our body. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What I was thinking is that would be a result of the body working too hard at accomplishing other things that it doesn't have enough resources or energy to manage our cycle, to have that in balance, to have that in order.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it makes good sense that the body would do this, right? When we're under stress, let's just go back, in time, when we were fighting lions and tigers, and when the body is under stress, or let's just say a period of starvation, right? That happened in our past human history. It's not a good idea to reproduce at that time. Your body doesn't have enough resources to carry a healthy pregnancy. And, our reproductive system kind of shuts down as a form of protection. And women can lose their cycles. So it's actually adaptive and it makes a lot of sense. Though in modern times, we don't experience periods of starvation, though, it could be self-inflicted because you're really busy and you skip meals and you forget to eat, or, you're not nourishing adequately. It can impact certainly our sex hormones, our thyroid hormones, our cortisol, all of it.
And so hormones are the responders, not the troublemakers.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
And how would that change the approach?
Yeah, I think, so often we're looking to blame hormones, as we talked about a minute ago, and that fixing our hormones is going to fix our symptoms. And very often, that happens. If we check blood work and we see that thyroid hormone is low, then replacing thyroid hormone can help a person feel better from those low thyroid symptoms. But it's rarely that simple and straightforward. And though, low thyroid hormone is a common condition, there are often other causes. So going back to this idea that hormones are responders and not the troublemakers, I mean that, our hormones are adjusting, to our stress, our sleep, our nutrition, inflammation, safety signals from our nervous system. And so, it's a little bit of that chicken and egg, right? When our hormones are not balanced, they can cause symptoms. But when our lifestyle creates an environment that doesn't support our hormones, in that sense, the hormones are responding to the environment. So for instance, when cortisol is high, it's because it's responding to chronic stress or poor sleep. If insulin is elevated, it's really just trying to stabilize our blood sugar. And, thyroid can, thyroid activity can slow down when the body's trying to conserve energy. So these shifts, again, are protective in the short term, but they may not feel good in the moment. So seeing hormones as responders changes the approach. Instead of asking, how do we suppress this hormone, or can I replace this hormone? We can ask, what is the body responding to? And how can we support what the body is needing or asking? And when this shift occurs, treatment will become more effective and more compassionate. And instead of treating symptoms in isolation, we focus on, well, what's driving them? And that's how lasting balance is restored.
So like you mentioned, they're a symphony, like hormones work together. So it could be like a domino effect. If one hormone starts to feel imbalanced due to stressors in the person's environment, then the other hormones will change the way they're functioning as well.
Absolutely. One hormone influences the other. Earlier, we talked about when there's, stress in the form of starvation, that's going to impact the sex hormones. But we definitely know that cortisol, due to high stress, impacts our thyroid function, and it impacts the functioning of the sex hormones. So they're working, one influences the other, and they're working together. And when one is out of balance, it impacts the others.
Was there a moment in your life when your hormones were telling you something, but you didn't realize it at the time?
Yes, absolutely. And that experience is actually a big part of why I talk about hormones the way that I do now. So this was a period in my life when on the outside, it looked like I was doing fine. I was working, parenting, keeping everything moving. But internally, I felt depleted. I low-grade fatigue, restless sleep, and probably more irritability than I fully recognized at that time. And I kept telling myself, well, this is life. Just push through. And looking back, my hormones were clearly responding to a high stress load and a nervous system that rarely had a chance to, downshift or, balance that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And my body was adapting in a way to just allow me to keep going. And instead of seeing my symptoms as information, I just treated it as something that I needed to overcome. Or worse, that, I wasn't strong enough. Was a personal failing. And things really started to shift when I finally slowed down enough to ask, what is my body trying to tell me? And that's when I realized my hormones weren't the problem, that they were just signaling that something in my life needed attention. And that experience fundamentally changed how I practice medicine. Now, when symptoms show up, I don't rush to silence them. I listen, because symptoms are often the body's most honest feedback. And very often, they're the first signals, even long before there are any lab abnormalities. And when we listen to that feedback and understand and make the changes, that's where real healing begins.
And how did learning to listen to hormonal cues change the way that you care for your body, especially as a busy physician and mom?
Yeah. So as a busy physician and mom, I really couldn't overhaul my life. I had to continue parenting and providing for my family. So I think what changed was how I responded to the signals of my symptoms, right? The fatigue, the irritability, the poor sleep. And instead of pushing through, I started asking, what does my body need right now to feel supported? And sometimes that meant protecting sleep instead of squeezing in one more task. Sometimes it meant eating in a way that stabilized my blood sugar rather than skipping meals. I think I shared in a prior episode that I was practicing intermittent fasting, which is great. But for me, that was not the right thing at that moment in my life. It was too stressful for my body. And I think the most important thing for me was recognizing the stress in my life, and that I needed to take more moments to balance my nervous system and to, get into that parasympathetic and get out of the fight or flight. And it could be just brief moments, pausing, taking a moment to practice some deep breaths, or just stepping outside, getting some fresh air, and just really breaking that stress nervous system. And that way lowered my cortisol, and stress and cortisol were not elevated all day long. And I also became much more respectful of recovery. And I just didn't push my body so hard. And I stopped treating rest as a luxury and started seeing it as something my physiology required. And well, it didn't make life perfect, but it made it more sustainable. And listening to my hormonal cues helped me work with my body instead of constantly overriding it. And that's what allowed me to be more present with myself and my family. It allowed my mood to steady. And ultimately, I felt much healthier in my work and in my personal life.
You mentioned something very, very important right now about it not making your life perfect, but making it sustainable. And I think that that is a really good piece of wisdom there, where prioritizing yourself, your rest, will allow you to go through those moments of your life that need more of you, right? And I'm sure you see this a lot with women in your practice, like patients, common patterns where women feel off hormonally even when their labs come back normal. What are those what are the commonalities that you see between these patients?
Yeah. So this is something that I hear all the time. Women tell me, I just don't feel like myself, but my labs came back normal. And that can feel confusing, and even invalidating, right? Um, so the truth is that, you know, our labs don't measure everything, right? So even if numbers fall in the normal range, our system can feel strained, and it can show up as fatigue, anxiety, or sleep, cravings, weight changes, or feeling less resilient than we used to. And when I see this, it often isn't just a single hormone being broken. It's due to the fact that many women carry a lot of pressure, or they're under a lot of pressure, and for a long period of time. Many women, juggle stress and busy schedules, disrupted sleep, irregular meals. And, the body adapts by shifting hormones in subtle ways that often don't show up clearly on labs. And I especially see this around midlife, in perimenopause, for instance. And this is when hormones start to fluctuate more. And so even though the labs look normal, people can have disruption in their sleep and mood and cycles. And that, again, the symptoms are the first signals, long before labs can even look abnormal. So what I tell patients is this: your symptoms matter. Labs are one piece of information, but how you feel is another important piece of information. And when we step back and look at stress, sleep, nourishment, and recovery, we often find the real explanation. And that's where meaningful improvements start.
And so you often talk about hormones as a part of the body's ecosystem. How do lifestyle rhythm, sleep, nourishment, movement, emotional stress shape hormonal harmony?
Yeah, I love that word, ecosystem. And when I talk about hormones, I think it's a beautiful way to look at our body as an ecosystem. And so I'm talking about rhythm and environment. Hormones respond to the cues we give our body every day. Sleep helps regulate, when hormones rise and fall. And this is especially true for cortisol and insulin. When our sleep is short or disrupted, our cortisol is going to be high. And so our signals get scrambled. And then nourishment is another key input. I keep talking about the importance of, eating regularly and adequately. And certainly that helps stabilize blood sugar, which then supports the entire hormone network. So skipping meals or underfueling sends a message of scarcity, and then the hormones adapt to that message. Another signal is movement. Consistent, supportive movement improves insulin sensitivity and hormone balance, but too much intense exercise without recovery can increase stress and increase cortisol. And then there's emotional stress, and that quietly shapes our hormones over time. That ongoing pressure keeps our stress hormones elevated, and then that influences everything else downstream. And when we think about the hormone hierarchy, cortisol is, I would say, at the pinnacle of that hierarchy. It influences our thyroid, and then that influences our sex hormones. So stress, including emotional stress, is a big player in all the other hormones, which we call downstream of cortisol. So, hormonal harmony isn't about controlling the hormones. It's really about creating daily rhythms that help the body feel safe and supported. And that's when the ecosystem works best. And, going back to that word ecosystem, it really is all of these factors put together, and that it's simple, but can feel complex and important to see, which of these signals needs our support.
I guess it also feels complex because the hormones play such an important role in our sense of well-being that when they're messed up, it's kind of hard to know what to do, or you're tired, and so it feels like you can't give yourself the things that you need to give yourself in order for them to be in balance. But they truly, when you say it, it seems simple. Like you mentioned rhythm, right? And that really stuck to me because, oh, your hormones respond to your rhythm. Your rhythm is how you're living, at what pace you're living your life. If you're accelerating too much, then it's like you get stressed out and they respond to that stress. And that emotional stress is so silent that sometimes it's hard to realize we're in it if we're not aware enough, right?
Yeah, I love that word rhythm because our hormones do follow a rhythm. If you think about cortisol, it follows the circadian rhythm, right? That in the morning, our cortisol should rise, wakes us up, gives us energy to start our day. And then throughout the day, our cortisol is slowly declining. And at night, it should be nice and low so that we can fall asleep. But if we're stressed or worried about something or working until right before we go to bed, our cortisol is going to remain high and we're going to have a harder time sleeping. And that cortisol can cause disrupted sleep overnight, wakes us up. Cortisol helps us to be alert, right? There's danger. We need to stay alert and awake. So cortisol definitely has a daily rhythm. And then our menstrual cycles follow a monthly rhythm. Think of it kind of follows, like the lunar calendar. Every month, a healthy menstrual cycle, is roughly the cycle of the moon. A little bit longer for some, a little bit less for others, but it should be on this monthly rhythm. It's kind of cool when we think about our hormones as, having this natural rhythm. And it's when we kind of go out of those rhythms that it can disrupt our hormones. And certainly hormonal disruption can disrupt the rhythm of our menstrual cycle. So it's very much that chicken and egg, right? It's hard to see what comes first, but it there's this sort of circular pattern rhythm.
Yeah, it is pretty cool, and it's really good to know that, so that at least when we feel imbalanced, we can kind of guide ourselves to what it is. Well, a first step, oh, how am I in my rhythms? And then maybe start working on that slowly. And for women entering perimenopause or menopause, symptoms can feel kind of scary and destabilizing. How do you help them reframe this transition as an opportunity for deeper connection and alignment?
Yeah, I love this question. someone who has personally gone through these transitions in life, I feel that I have more than medical authority, or not authority, that's not the right word, but medical knowledge. That I have personal experience. So for sure, for many women, perimenopause and menopause can feel scary because the body is changing in unfamiliar ways. What I help women understand is that this transition isn't a breakdown, it's a reorganization. The hormonal shifts can make it harder to override stress, cope with poor sleep, and that constant overgiving. And in some ways, it's like, gosh, well, my body doesn't function as well. Well, you can think of it that way, but I think of it as in that reorganization, it helps you to prioritize treating your body in a way that it needs in this phase of life, and that we are less tolerant of chronic stress, or poor sleep, or overgiving, that constant overgiving that we do in the earlier parts of our life. And so, once we, recognize that, our prior patterns don't work today, we're able to make some shifts, and that our body is asking us to be more honest, and supportive in terms of what habits we need to maintain to feel good. So in that way, I think of this stage of life as an invitation. It's like the body is asking for that more honest rhythm, and that may mean more rest, steadier nourishment, clearer boundaries. I love this one. This, something I'm working on personally, and deeper self-attunement. And that our symptoms aren't punishment. They're just signals pointing to what needs support now in this phase of life. So when women stop fighting the changes and start listening, this transition often brings more clarity, alignment, and connection with ourselves, our body. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me? The question can become, what is my body asking for in this season? And this shift can be deeply stabilizing and empowering. And I think if you talk to a lot of postmenopausal women, they really start to come into their own power, and it's exciting. And, now that I'm on the other side of that, whole perimenopause, menopause, it is empowering, and it feels good, and that it's a natural part of what women go through. And, certainly something to talk to your doctor about. There's ways to support a woman through these transitions, certainly foundationally as in lifestyle, right? We talked about all those things. And then, there may be some supplements that help to balance hormones. And then, ultimately, hormone replacement therapy is a certainly safe and viable option for many women, but that's something, you want to talk to your doctor about.
This is a very beautiful perspective you just gave us on how to view perimenopause and menopause, this stage of life. And I think that this should have its own episode, because I know that so many people, so many women are really longing to talk about this more. And what it became clear to me as you were talking about this is that your body's so wise that it adapts to these stages of life that a woman goes through. And like you said, it's that wisdom time where it's like you need to be doing other things. Your rhythm needs to be different. Maybe you need to take more care of yourself, as you have given so much. Now it's a little bit more a time for you. No,
Absolutely.
you went through motherhood, and I'm sure I'm not a mother, but you are. But that never stops. You're always a mother. But then you come into this stage of your life where it's okay. This is a little bit more stable now. It's time to come back to myself in a way.
Yeah, I think that it is beautiful to think about how our hormones adapt to our different life stages. And yeah, in that, at least in postmenopause, it really is about coming back to ourselves and practicing that deep self-care. And it's almost like, your body sends a signal like, you really can't, override your fatigue and just keep pushing. And you really need to take care of yourself. And it's a beautiful transition to own coming back to yourself and practicing that deep self-care as your children don't need you as much, as both of you are evolving and moving forward in life.
That's so beautiful. So is like ourselves adapting to our bodies di- different way of functioning, different way, but not any less or any more, just a different way of functioning. And for someone listening who feels exhausted, anxious, or hormonally out of sync, what's the first small manageable step they can take toward rebuilding balance?
Yeah. I think when people think about achieving balance, they want to fix everything, right? But the first step really isn't fixing everything. It's stabilizing one signal. So if someone feels exhausted, anxious, or hormonally out of sync, I usually start with one simple daily anchor that helps the body feel safer. So for many people, that may be eating regularly, not perfectly, but just consistently to steady blood sugar and eat in a way that steadies blood sugar. So more protein, less refined carbohydrates, more fat and fiber. Another, simple daily anchor is protecting sleep. And so that may be done by choosing one small boundary at night, right? Like, putting our phones aside an hour before we go to bed or closing our laptop, no more work. That'll lower the cortisol. And sometimes it may be just pausing, these micro moments to slow and rebalance our nervous system. So a few slow, deep breaths, that brief walk outside, or just a moment of stillness where it's like we come back to ourselves. And so, it's not anything dramatic that needs to change. It's just, one simple daily anchor. And when you do this, it sends the body a repeated message of support. You're safe, you're nourished, and you can settle. And when you do this consistently, even in these small ways, the hormone system often begins to recalibrate on its own. And balance is never rebuilt all at once. It starts with one steady, compassionate signal. And I think, we all get overwhelmed when we try to fix everything. And it's just take one simple step at a time and to do it consistently.
I guess it makes sense to see it one step at a time because, as you mentioned, when we try to fix everything at once, then we had more unconsciously more stress instead of,
Mm.
and so it becomes
No,
counterintuitive.
and counterproductive.
And counterproductive. Yes, that's a word.
Yeah.
Yes. So if there's one thing that you want our listeners to remember about their hormones, especially when they feel frustrated by their symptoms, what would that be?
Yeah. So if there's one thing I want people to remember, it's this. Your hormones are not betraying you. They're trying to communicate with you. So when symptoms show up, it doesn't mean your body's broken or failing. It means your system is responding to the life you're living and asking for more support in this season. And if you can meet these signals with curiosity instead of frustration. So for instance, what might my body need right now? Everything begins to shift. And this single change opens the door to perhaps more compassion, more clarity, and more effective self-care. So our hormones aren't the problem. Again, they're the feedback. And learning to listen to that feedback is one of the most powerful acts of self-care you can make. So that's what I would say for people to remember about their hormones.
Thank you so much, Dr. Julie. I know that I will see my hormones more as a guide now than something that is working against me. And we've reached the end of our episode, Dr. Julie. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with?
Yeah. Well, if today brought up more questions or, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. You can visit my website at www.julietawmd.com. That's JULIETAWMD.com. Or you can send me a direct message on Instagram at julie.taw.md. I love hearing from you, and I'm always happy to support however I can.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Medicine with Meaning, and join us next time as we continue exploring the everyday practices that support whole person healing.